Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us for this event titled the Potosí Principle Archive, a roundtable conversation. My name is Olivia Casa, and I'm the curator and exhibition program manager here at the Institute for Studies on Latin American Art, or ISLAA. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, ISLAA is a New York-based institute that supports the study and visibility of Latin American art through exhibitions, publications, and partnerships with universities and other art institutions. This event is organized in conjunction with one of our current exhibitions titled Revisiting the Potosí Principle Archive, Histories of Art and Extraction, which I co-curated with Puyan Karimbeji and is on view currently at ISLAA's location at 142 Franklin Street in Tribeca through next Saturday, February 10th. Revisiting the Potosí Principle Archive is a project by the artists Alice Kreischer and Andreas Siekmann and examines the intertwined histories of art, labor, and extraction in Latin America, taking the colonial history of silver mining in the city of Potosí and present-day Bolivia as its starting point. At the exhibition center is the Potosí Principle Archive, a series of 36 booklets produced by Alice Kreischer and Andreas Siekmann that gather historical and contemporary sources, interviews, essays, and various other texts by scholars, artists, and writers, including Silvia Federici and María Galindo, that reflect on the many forms and legacies of colonialism and extraction. Following the exhibition's focus, this event will explore the Potosí Principle Archive and will include 3 approximately 10-minute presentations by Miguel Hilari, María Galindo, and Silvia Federici in that order, and it will be introduced by Puyan Karimbeji and followed by an approximately 30-minute conversation led by Maya Wilson-Sánchez. We'll also be leaving time for questions from the audience after the discussion portion concludes. If you'd like to ask a question, please submit it through the Zoom Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen at any point throughout the course of the event. It's now my pleasure to turn the event over to Puyan, who will introduce the speakers and the exhibition. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks to everyone who came, and my special thanks, of course, to ISLAA for providing this platform for this conversation to take place, and Olivia in particular, who is my curator in this project, co-curator, and without whom I think all of us wouldn't be here today. So thanks, Olivia, for doing all this, organizing all this. And I want to say thank you to Alice and Andreas, who have been so, who have so generously shared the ideas and works with us over the course of this 2-year project. They're currently on a residency in Venice. I think really enjoying taking some time off from not working on the Potosí Principle and working again on their individual practices, because I think there is something incredibly sprawling about the Potosí Principle, and it's maybe, I think they enjoy in some way currently to just bring it back a little bit. So what is so sprawling about the Potosí Principle? I think over the course of working on this project, Olivia and I think, encountered a certain type of something like an infinity, especially in this this new 4-volume catalog that just came out in 2021, which is the Principle Archive, which I sometimes joked, you cannot read, really, you can only read in it, because it's so much. And if you ever get the chance to open it, it's in the exhibition. It's basically the collection of the booklets that Olivia just mentioned. You discover facts, histories, details, aberrations, dead ends. And I think the idea is to get lost and then reappear and get lost in this labyrinth of stories. So to me, the Potosí Principle always seemed like a project, and the Potosí Principle Archive as well, as a project that wants to take you elsewhere and then have you return to see the present in a different light. And it does so, I think, in borrowing heavily from its subject matter, Baroque painting and architecture. So one thing you will encounter in the exhibition if you get a chance to see it, is the interest working with visual axes. So every angle matters, that you move just a little bit around and a new connection will emerge. So I think one of the ideas here is like similar, I mean, somewhat different from Baroque painting, where maybe the connection between heaven and earth is really at the center. And in this exhibition, it's more about the connection between history and present. But yeah, somewhat similar. And the second thing I think that's quite important and that they borrow from Baroque art is the fascination for metamorphosis. So you follow these threads and realize how one thing becomes another, right? Like if you ever spend some time with the Baroque, then you'll see this is very much, something interesting. So with that said, I would like to briefly introduce the speakers and the moderator who will be presenting today. Silvia Federici is a theorist based in New York, who has for many years now revised the ways we think about social movements, the socio-sexual division of labor, power relations, and the intersectionality of social struggles. Most recently, she has published the book Patriarchy of the Wage, Notes on Marx, Gender, and Feminism. María Galindo is an anarchist feminist and member of the Mujeres Creando movement in Bolivia. She's a writer, radio broadcaster, and filmmaker, and has been part of the Potosí Principle since its inception in 2009. Miguel Hilari is a filmmaker based in La Paz, Bolivia. His work is concerned with memory, migration, histories of colonialism, especially related to indigenous people of the Andean region. His films have been shown in many festivals, museums, and theaters. Among them, and this I mentioned because we are in New York, Film Lincoln Center here, very much across the street. And last but not least, Maya Sanchez is a writer and PhD student at Columbia and a colleague of mine in the Department of Art History. She lives between Toronto, Ibarra, and New York, and researches museology and historiography with a particular interest in the indigenous arts of the Americas. So please help me in welcoming our guests today. Okay, I'm going to turn off, right?
Thank you for that, Puyan. I think we're going to begin with Miguel Hilari's presentation.
Thank you, Puyan, Maya, and Olivia. I'm really honored to be here and to be able to share some thoughts and, of course, to listen to Silvia and Maria. I will share my screen. And I want to talk briefly about my film Bocamina, which is currently showing at the exhibition at ISLAA. And afterwards, I want to touch the broader issue of circulation of images and its colonial legacy through one particular story of one painting that caught my attention during the last year. So first with the film Bocamina, it was filmed in 2018. This is after the exhibition of Potosí Principle, but somehow inspired by it and thought as a reaction to the painting Descripción del Cerro Rico y la Imperial Villa de Potosí, which is a depiction of splendor made by Miguel de Berrío in 1758. Bocamina is structured into two parts. The first one shows the work inside the mines of Cerro Rico, the hard work inside of the mines, followed by portraits of the miners when leaving their workplace. And in the second part, I visited schools in the mining districts of the city, and I took old images with me that were colonial paintings like the one we see right now, La Virgen Cerro, but also photographs from the early 20th century, in order to see and to hear what children would say about them, or to see how they react to these images. And I thought, rather than hearing art historians or intellectuals or filmmakers talk about these images, it would be more interesting to listen to the children from Potosí. And the kids related very easily with these images, as if they would have known them very well. And they talked about a lot of things they see in these images that probably also art historians or intellectuals would see in these images. So that led me to think that these images are very present in our heads, in our thoughts, and that they still depict our society today. And on the other hand, they still shape the way we think about things, or we think about society today. The film then ends with a series of portraits of the children in the same fashion that we saw portraits of the miners, and a view of the city of Potosí, a bit similar to the painting from Berrio. And as I said, it is currently showing at ISLAA, but you can also catch it on YouTube for free. Everyone is invited. And this said, I want to talk a little bit about the story of one specific painting from Potosí that has a direct connection to New York and to US art institutions. This story caught my attention last year when I knew about this exhibition in New York. And it was thanks to some newspaper articles by artist and journalist Reinaldo González. So this painting is called Crápula et Lascivia in Latin, Embriaguez y Lascivia in Spanish, and Drunkenness and Wantonness in English. It's an anonymous oil painting dating from the 17th to 18th centuries that was made in what today is Bolivia. As you can see, it pictures figures in lush clothing at a decadent banquet, drinking and embracing while servants bring more food and wine. It was first photographed hanging in a rural church in San Miguel de Carma in Potosí, in a 1948 book by Argentine historian Martín Noel. This is the church. So after the Bolivian National Revolution in 1952, land property was restored to indigenous farmers, and San Miguel de Carma, formerly an hacienda or an estate, became a comunidad or a village. And the hacendados, the land and estate owners, left San Miguel de Carma after the revolution. However, villagers remember the hacendados coming back in the 1960s, claiming paintings from the church to be their property. After their visit, several paintings were reported missing by the villagers to authorities in the city of Potosí, but their demand was not deemed important. Then in the 1970s, the art dealers Fernando and Marcelo de Medeiros from Sao Paulo are said to have bought the painting. And in 1997, they sold it to the New York art collectors Roberta and Richard Huber. Their collection is valued at $2.5 million, and it's one of the largest assemblies of Spanish and Portuguese colonial art in private hands. In their house, you can see this painting, Crápula et Lascivia, hanging in the middle of the wall, partly covered by another painting. This picture appeared in 2012 in the magazine Antiques. The Hubers started their collection during their first trip to Bolivia in 1973, when they bought a painting in Sucre for $100. And a great part of their collection was assembled when taking paintings out across borders was much easier before certain rules that are in place today, rules which they say now to admire and respect. In 2015, the Hubers were informed that 2 of their other paintings, which they had bought in Sao Paulo, also originally from Bolivia, were listed on the Interpol Stolen Works of Art database, a directory identifying more than 52,000 missing objects. The couple said that they were unaware of this Interpol list, and they returned the paintings to Bolivia and were congratulated for it by our president. They shared cocktails, handshakes, and pictures with Bolivian high society. And Mr. Huber said he would check that list the next time. Finally, in 2018, the Hubers sold Crapula et Lascivia to the Blanton Museum of Art at the University of Texas at Austin. And here it made an appearance in 2021, serving as a background image for Colonial Latin American Foodies, an online event for taco connoisseurs, in which a chef and a food historian trace the origins of different dishes from Latin American cuisine back to colonial times. This is the journey this painting has made, and I thought it may serve as an example or as a parable to so many journeys of so many stolen paintings that get legalized through a series of transactions and finally appear in museums of the North. That's what I wanted to share. Thanks a lot. Back to Maya.
Thank you so much, Miguel. That photo of the collectors with Evo Morales is just something else. Yes, thank you. I believe María Galindo is presenting next.
I don't remember my name, but I know my name is not America. I know I am not Latin America either. To change my name, you did not baptize me, but by raping me, you imposed another name on me. You were hoping to break me and make me forget who I am. But I know I don't belong to you. I know I'm not a piece of you. I'm not a part of you. I am another continent, another place in the world, another place, another person, different from you. I don't remember my name, but I know who I am. This is a poem I wrote for Potosí Principle, and its name is America. I really have to say very sincerely, I don't like to speak in English. It's imposed as many things. I will speak in Spanglish, and I hope you will understand what I say. And if you don't understand, it will not be the matter of the language. I want to put clear from the beginning from which point am I talking to you. I am talking to you from the ash of the world called Bolivia. In a gender perspective, I am talking to you as a no woman. In the ethnic perspective, I am talking to you as a bastard. In a social perspective, I am talking to you as an anti-señorita. I ask, please, to use the photos I have sent of my work in Potosí Principle and other artwork, which I am doing since 30 years. For Potosí Principle, I developed a research concerning women bodies in colonialism. I don't have enough time here to explain about the whole research, but I want to put the attention in the fundamental thesis of that research, which is the patriarchalization. I have to say again that I am the author of this thesis of the patriarchalization, although many people in the academic world, in the NGOs, use the thesis without naming me. No wonder about that. That is also extractivism, intellectual extractivism. This thesis has a big force. The force to break and break and break. First, the force to break the idea of a universal patriarchy which is supposed to function all over the world in the same way. In my research, I developed the structure of patriarchy for the Andean societies. The thesis of the patriarchalization has the force to break the hegemonic sense of feminism, which says very simple, feminism means equality beyond men and women, and feminism means right for women. To say in 2 words how depatriarchalization breaks this idea, this hegemonic, liberal, occidental idea of feminism, to say it in 2 words, I can say we need revolution, not inclusion. We don't want inclusion, we want revolution. The third way in which the thesis of depatriarchalization breaks is bringing a new horizon to feminism, and is an horizon which is anti-systemic, against a horizon of inclusion, of be part of. I have to say that depatriarchalization is a reality which is already going on, but at the same time is a method of struggle, and at the same time is a utopia, a point to reach. The thesis of depatriarchalization has a complementary second thesis, which is this one. You cannot decolonize without depatriarchalizing. This second complementary thesis is very important because breaks the idea that colonialism is one field and patriarchy is another field, and brings you to the understanding that colonialism and patriarchy belong together, that colonialism is in itself a patriarchal structure, and that patriarchal structure is in itself a colonial structure. Maybe you are asking yourself, what is talking about this woman or this no woman? We invited her to talk about an art exhibition. Yes, because I, in my work, brought a conflict in the exhibition between politics and art. Not a conflict only from politics into art, but also a conflict from art into politics, making a sort of fundamental breach and bringing art to a political level and politics to an art level. And therefore, the most important, you are looking, for example, one of my pieces about the Virgen Cerro. But the most important thing in this participation is the political thesis for struggle. Talking about the symbolic level, it is interesting for me to tell you something. The colonial art, the colonial pieces of art, some of those has shown Miguel, have been understood as syncretic pieces. And I disagree with that vision. I used another method to understand and to research that pieces of colonial art. And I used the method of deconstruction. What does it mean in words to use the method of deconstruction? That means to find different symbolic levels functioning together simultaneously, one on top of each other. So we have a complex symbolic structure the whole time. We are not dealing with a syncretic, simple structure, but we are dealing with a complex structure. What is important about this? It is important because it is also this complex structure in different levels, one on top of each other, is the structure of patriarchy, of colonial patriarchy in the Andes. It is not a simple structure. Well, I am finishing my time. I ask, please, my last two photos. I want to show you the photo with Silvia Federici in La Paz, Bolivia, because when Potosí Principle was organized in Bolivia, we as Mujeres Creando, not as museum, not as Reina Sofía, nothing. As Mujeres Creando, we invited Silvia Federici because her work was great inspiring my work on Potosí Principle. Although I reached different conclusions as her. And therefore, I want to remember this moment. And then the next picture, please, the last picture, is a picture of me making a performance on the streets of La Paz because the main place for history, the main place for politics, and the main place for art, for my art, is the street and not the art institution. I will end my brief speech with a graffiti. El chachahuarmi obligatorio llegó con la iglesia y la colonia. Now in English, the binary system arrived with the church and the colony. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Maria. That was really lovely. Thank you. I love to see that picture of you and Silvia in La Paz. Thank you for sharing that. And now we'll move on to our last presenter, Silvia Federici.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me? Thank you to you all. And thank you, Maria. Oh, it's beautiful to see the picture and remember that time. What a great time. And I'm going to speak today a little bit more in general about the Principle Potosí as a project, as a political project. And I want to say that particularly, after I looked at the 4 volumes, impossible to look at all that they contain, but over and over and over, the importance of that project is really, one of the main issues that I like to talk about. For years, Alice, Andrea, and Maria, and a whole group of people have worked to make very concrete, visible, with a great, rich material, the fact that there is a strong continuity, in the history of capitalist exploitation of the world, capitalist accumulation, that in fact the form of genocidal warfare and recolonization that we see across the world are directly connected, to the processes that characterize the beginning of capitalist development. The project has developed, with in mind, in response, to the devastating consequences of the politics of debt, the globalization, neoliberal expansion of capitalism, the work of the IMF and the World Bank, right, in imposing, political programs that have pauperized millions of people, forced them out of their ancestral land, and forced government to open their door to all kinds of extractivist companies. And they've shown the continuity. This, in fact, is what capitalism has always been, and the continuity between the past and the present. And of course, they've not been alone in doing so. There's been a whole set of work theories. But the fact that the Potosí Principle, realized that, demonstrated that, through material, literally material, and above all visual material, has given to it a power. It has brought down, to the realization of what were the consequences, in the life of people. It has given a power also to the words that, rarely we find, from a theoretical manuscript. So I think that this is very important because that continuity, the realization of that continuity, the capitalism is structurally dependent, on the expulsion of people from their land, on conquest, colonization, on violence. The violence is a structural condition, a necessary condition of capitalist development, is today more evident than ever. So today we can read the Potosí Principle and think of Palestine. We can think of, what is happening in the Sahel, what is happening in the Congo. And again, the fact that this is represented, with material taken, from different, not only from abstract theorizing, but also from the visual art and from painting. It's give it a power that is extremely important. For me also, the fact that to look at the painting themselves and to see the function of art in legitimizing, the elite, past and present, its legitimization, and also the function of art, to terrorize, to instill terror. I mean, one of the things that, struck me most, looking at those imagery was the imagery of the, devils, the many representation of hell, that in a sense, were representation, they were taken from the reality of the time. In other words, the kind of torture they were imagined in those paintings inflicted by the devil on the subject were in fact, a representation of the many, many tortures, they were inflicted, on the indigenous people who were contrasting, who were resisting, who were, opposing, the devastation that was, posed on them. And for me, this was particularly important because, the work that I have done, and this is why, I was asked to participate, in the principle, in the project, is because of a book that I wrote called Caliban and the Witch, that in fact really looks at the history of women, and women not only in Europe or the United States, but women, also in the colonial world. And as Maria has said, the fact that colonization is patriarchalization and vice versa. That in fact, the destruction, the war on women, and as the war on nature, the war on indigenous population was, an essential element, of the conquest and the colonization process. And in particular, in Caliban and the Witch, I focused on the role of witch hunting in Europe and witch hunting also in the so-called New World, to break the resistance of people, and particularly, to institute, new forms of patriarchal domination, new forms of discipline of women, disempowering women, and in particular destroying the collectivity of women, destroying the communalism that had characterized women's life and also the life of indigenous population. And so those images of terror, those images of the devil, and the punishment, the horrendous punishment represented in those paintings really resonated with me, with the whole history of witch hunting. And, also corroborated, the realization that already, by the 17th century, on an international level, you had the formation of an international elite, made particularly of religious authority, but not only, that in a sense was continuously exchanging, the knowledge, experiences, and strategies that they were developing, either in Europe or in Bolivia or, in Potosí. They were continuously exchanging and learning from each other. So that this international exchange and formation of an international class that already worked with in mind not a national map, but with an international map, was also very, very important. And in fact, it affected, the course of witch hunting, through and through, and changing the nature of accusation, changing also the forms of torture and investigation. And so, again, I think that the great contribution, political, cultural, artistic, of the Potosí Principle is that, in a way, once we deep ourselves, into the work that is presented now in the 4th volume, we find it possible to think of the present without, at the same time, not connecting it through the colonial past, not connecting it to the history of conquest. Although today is taking new forms, but nevertheless, it's the same drive. It's the same drive to exploitation, the same drive to the subordination of human life, to the principle of the accumulation of wealth, right? And so I really would encourage those who come to look at the exhibit, to look at the videos, and but also begin to look. It's impossible to think of being able to go through all the 4 volumes. But I think even a brief immersion give us an understanding, of the strategy that was used by the contributors, which is a very powerful one, because in a sense it makes very vivid, the continuity between the crimes of the past and the continuing crime of the present, and also the history of resistance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Silvia. If I can please invite the other presenters to join us on the screen. I also want to say that we are going to have a Q&A at the end of about conversation for about half an hour. So please feel free to add your questions into the question panel at the bottom. So first of all, thank you all so much for these really interesting presentations. I'm wondering perhaps if we could begin with something that Silvia mentioned, this idea of, the devils in paintings, and this idea of like art can really terrify you in a way, or almost in I guess the context of colonial painting as a method for evangelizing, right? I know Maria and Mujeres Creando, you've done a lot of work on altars, right? And the evangelizing power that these this genre of art and architecture has. And I think, Miguel, this also goes back to you showing these colonial paintings, right? In these different communities in Potosí. And I'm wondering here if we can think about how art can put people in danger as well. I think this goes back to, Miguel, what you were talking about, right? This story of the hacendados, the landowners, or the ex-landowners, to go back to the plantation and to say, hey, these paintings belong to me, and then all of a sudden the paintings are stolen, right? I think it was Silvia Vera Cusicanqui in her Principio Potosí Reverso that also brings this up, right? The kind of black market of colonial painting, and with the really intense interest of growing institutional colonial painting collections in the West, what kind of violence can this enact upon people, right? Is this a kind of, a new case study of a kind of form of extraction where you have people going into small villages in the Andes and actually just stealing paintings? Yeah.
Maybe it's interesting to put the example of La Virgen Cerro, which is the painting in which I work, because this is another way of violence, different as that what you are proposing now, because I don't want the imagine that, oh, poor indigenous people who are, no, please don't be maternalista. Please don't. For example, with the painting La Virgen Cerro, there are many of them because it is an iconic picture of colonialism, where the mountain becomes the Madonna and is surrounded by the colonial authorities. What happened in Bolivia, which is very interesting, is that that picture was iconic of the colonialism. Then came the Republic, and the picture became iconic for the Republic. And then came the plurinational state, and the picture still has the status of iconic. So that's very important to understand, that is very important to understand. Because I am talking about these complex levels, complex different levels, symbolic levels, which are inside the picture, which are in a relationship in different levels with the subjectivity of the people. And no wonder that an iconic picture of the power continues in the time as iconic picture of the power.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I mean, then would you say it becomes iconic in your work and in the work of Mujeres Creando? Does it become iconic in the market? Or what is
No. It is iconic for the official version of what art is in a state as Bolivia, in a country as Bolivia, not for Mujeres Creando. Mujeres Creando made a lot of works on it, and I worked on that picture. Bueno, I can say in English, but no, not, you don't understand me. And it is not a matter of English. You didn't understand me. I say, this picture didn't lose its iconic status, no matter the social situation changed.
Because something remained the same.
Yeah,
Obviously.
exactly, therefore.
Because the continuity, that's right. That's the continuity of power that takes form, different form, but in the end, it's like the question of extractivism, right? I learned about extractivism the first time in 2009 in La Paz, precisely in the discussion around Principle Potosí, when at the time, it was the first time the connection between extractivism and colonialism, and Tapia talking about extractivism, internal colonialism. And this, of course, within a very different, presumably, political regime. And yet, same continuity of extractivism.
Mm-hmm. No, right, the power remains the same, right? I'm wondering, Miguel, if you wanted to share anything about this painting. There's a really special scene in your film where you're showing this painting of the Virgen Cerro to a group of children, and they're going back and forth between them as to whether or not one of them, oh, it's the Virgin, and then they're like, no, it's Madre Tierra, and there's a point of confusion between the children here, and how does that fit in?
I think that's interesting because in a way these discussions the children have over these images, they show that they are very familiar with the symbolism that is in the images. So they debate whether the mountain is the Virgin or the mountain is Pachamama. And that's a debate that is very long in Bolivian art history, a lot of texts written about it. But the children go over it very easily, like very familiar with those things. And I think that's interesting because it's also a reflection of what Maria was saying right now, that if these colonial images still have the meaning that they had when they were painted, it means that our structure, our society, a lot of things didn't change. It still means the things that it meant when it was painted. And another thing I think Maria also touched in her presentation, and that was interesting, was that I think she mentioned She didn't want to talk about syncretism, but maybe more about resistance, or about things that were in the paintings that we read today as syncretism, but that at some point meant resistance more than fusion. So yeah, that's something that I think the paintings, they're not closed, so they can give more new meanings, more meanings, more complex meanings, depending on when or to whom they are shown. And that was just very striking for me when I showed them in the schools in Potosí. So like to see how alive the paintings are.
Yeah, they really become activated in the hands of all these kids, right? And they're all sort of like fighting over looking at the image. It's a really beautiful film. Maybe at the end, Olivia can post the link to the YouTube link to see it on YouTube if you don't get a chance to see it at the exhibition. I have one question for all of you that's about debt. So Silvia, in the booklet, in your interview in the booklet, you talk about how debt is an instrument of recolonization. And this you were talking about in the context of the IMF. And I've been thinking a lot about debt and in more basic terms, who we are responsible for, who we are responsible to, who do we owe and why, specifically in thinking about the Central Andes. I think about how the Incas and then the Spanish sort of twisted the Mita or the Minga system into a system of exploitation, right? From a system that was about a kind of shared communal responsibility to one that became about owing a certain amount of products or goods to the state, and then to a system that became about physical exploitative labor. So how does ideas of debt and responsibility affect your work, and how do you see these two things differently or as related?
I don't know. I mean, I'll start to say that I've been involved for many years, for many years now, in a struggle, part of the anti-globalization movement against debt. Before, when I was in Africa, against the use of debt, the debt crisis, the so-called debt crisis, which was completely artificially engineered, basically by a stroke of the pen of the Federal Reserve government in the United States in 1979. And then all of a sudden, you have the IMF and the World Bank coming in. And way I saw with my eyes what it meant in Africa. It meant that immediately all political, economic decision had to be changed. And that was really, and programs had to be installed that restore basically the position of this country into a colonial status. And there was, of course, a big struggle against the debt. So the debt as a hook, as a political instrument for decolonization, for plunging countries into such level of poverty that people will be forced to migrate, that they will be forced to open up, their doors to oil companies, to mineral companies, to agribusiness, and you name them, even the companies for the green gasoline. So all of that. And then, of course, over the years, women in debt, because we discovered that those who are most in debt actually across the world happen to be women, because of the really precarious condition of work. And so there is now, for example, in Argentina, the women in Yuna Menos, Veronica Gago, Lucy Cavallero, many other women are actually developed a perspective, feminist perspective on that with the slogan, who owes to whom? The idea of a debt, for example, the African people or people in Latin America owe a debt is an abomination. It's really an abomination. Actually, they are creditors. So the whole question of who owes to whom. And that's why debt now has become one of the main terrain, I think, both of exploitation, but also the main terrain of struggle. And this is true also for the feminist movement. I think it's becoming a very, very important issue for feminism.
I would like to say that we developed a lot of work on debt, very different than Gago and the women in Argentina since 2000, because we denounced as movement that the ajuste estructural, which I don't know how to say in English, but I hope you understand, was possible to be introduced in our society, or neoliberalism was possible to be introduced in our society only using the women in huge mass, offering any woman a debt through the microcredit. Because Gago and so on, they are talking about macroeconomy. And we want to put the idea of debt in the domestic economy. Any woman since 1985, any woman belonging to the Bloque Popular has a debt, a microcredit. Yunus had the technology in Bangladesh and became Nobel Prize. This debt for each woman has the possibility that that woman support the kids, the man, with her work more than 8 hours per day, with no, it is an exploitation, but it is invisible, because she doesn't have a chef who say you have to work 12 hours a day. She just has a debt. And capitalism offers the debt as opportunity. And this offering is very perverse. In Bolivia, there was mostly in the Aymara field a technology of debt which was in the community and is called pasanaku. It means each woman pays an amount, they collect the amount and give once in the month to one of the women. So they didn't need the bank. And it was incredible, because when one woman, the turn to take that debt was open. If one woman was sick, could say, listen, I am sick. I need the money this month. And she became it. And next month, other. Well, the microcredit came and took those groups of friends, women, and say, listen, you don't have to give your money. Bank is going to give the money. And you have to control each other to pay the debt. The communities of friends get broken because the bank didn't need anymore to make the control. The women make to each other. And the interest of this microcredit are 36% per year. It means the interest of the debt of microcredit are the highest interest in the whole market of debt. Is greater than the interest of the state, is much greater of the interest of the great capitalists. They pay 5% of interest the year. and that woman pays 36% per year. It is impossible for her through a debt to live better, to get a home, to get something. She just get the discipline to work and work and work to pay the debt. That is very important because this domestic technology affects direct to the social, to al tejido social, to the social level. And it is also colonialism. The USA government, the USA aid organizes debt in Bolivia, in whole Central America. This is not a technology only for Bolivia. This is a technology for the women of the South. So these women can, with the debt, eat, have the illusion they get an opportunity and work for the bank.
It's also a way of expropriating women from whatever little piece of land they have. Because, for example, the system of repayment, you have to start repaying the debt, so soon that it's impossible, for example, to use the money you take to improve whatever agriculture you're engaging. You have to, in fact, use the money to do, commercial things, to sell things. Also, the other thing is that they don't give you all the money. If you borrow $100, they might give you 90. But you pay the interest on the whole. and on top of it, many times the money is taken by the man. So it's a real perverse system that it is. In the United States, what has happened, however, is that, for instance, when women have begun to take jobs outside the home, immediately there's been the formation of companies that are called payday loan companies, which means you get your pay and immediately you go get a loan because the pay is so low that you can never actually survive on it or get some autonomy from that pay. So that has become really the new form of financial enslavement. It's become really a way of major disciplining of women. And Maria said, the system that was also in Africa, the tontine. You don't go to the bank. The tontine, everybody puts a little money every month, and then when you need it, you get it. But this was a very universal system in pre-capitalist, but there's been exploited, and now everybody is immersed, so the future is all mortgaged.
Yeah, payday loans also really popular in the United States, Canada, across Europe, and Silvia, you talked so much about immigrant communities in your contribution to the booklet, and especially amongst migrant and diasporic communities. Yeah. Miguel, did you want to add anything to this conversation about debt? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I want to make sure we don't miss you.
No, you won't miss me. I'm not adding.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we have about 10 minutes left, so I'd like to ask my last question for all of you. So I wanted to ask about what we might call the spirits of capitalism. So Silvia, in your interview, that's part of the archive booklets, you speak about how in the late 70s and early 80s in Malaysia and the Philippines, there was a sort of collective possession that happened, where young women who used to work in the countryside and then went on to work in factories, they spent 13 hours looking through little lenses to build things, and you mentioned how they started to see evil spirits in their lenses, and they had to have priests comes in and try to get the evil spirits out. And Miguel, in your video piece, it starts with this painting of the Cerro Rico, right? Which is also featured in the Silver and the Cross video by Harun Fakori. That's also in the exhibition. And this painting shows churches and chapels throughout the landscape. I think, every reservoir has its own chapel or something like that. And your video highlights the veneration of El Tío, who's this god spirit that lives inside the mines, inside the Cerro Rico. And this is someone who requires sacrifice and who you do offerings for in exchange of success, safety. So I'm wondering if all three of you're very familiar with all this. I'm also thinking about when you're in La Paz and you go to the Museum of Ethnography, and the whole section they have on the history of metallurgy, Elvira Espejos has added an El Tío, right? And he's on exhibition in the museum, and there's a really wonderful video beside him on the kinds of rituals that are done for El Tío. So I'm wondering if any of you can speak to the spirits, or perhaps the spiritual practices or spiritual consequences, we could say, of capitalism.
Yeah. Oh, it's yes, of course. There's all these counter rituals that often people adopt. Michael Tausig has written about it, right? The devil and the commodity fall, and how many minds, I think in Bolivia and other places, people worship these spirits that for I think the women in the Philippines, they were terrorized. There was no worship. They were terrorized because I think they were driven mad by rhythms of work and such brutal physical conditions, that it takes generation to actually create, an industrial worker, a worker, capable of sustaining without going mad, those kind of rhythms of work. And here's where young women thrown into this most horrendous type of industrial work. And so the pretense that this was a kind of collective hysteria, the monster they were seeing in their microscope was really capitalism itself that was consuming their body, that was consuming their energies. The same ways, for example, that there's been a whole set of young women dying in the flower industry throughout Latin America. By the time they are 3-4 years working in the flower industry, all their organs have already been severely affected. So I think this brings back the question of a system that basically destroys body and soul, and what have been the forms of resistance that the people have adopted, in addition to the confrontation, the strike, the refusal of work, what have been, but to me, another thing that I wanted to bring in, and that's the last point, is how today, speaking of evangelization, we have seen a massive, intervention of evangelical sects throughout the world, from Papua New Guinea to Africa to Latin America, and bringing in again this very combative Christianity that tells people that their impoverishment is not due to the material condition, but because people in their community are satanic. They are conspiring against them. And I've been following assassination and burning alive of women. For example, recently in Mato Grosso, women, spiritual leader of the Guarani community was burnt alive, and a house burnt to the ground, accused of being a witch. And so once again, this marriage of the sword and the cross, and how religion is being used today again, to enslave, to divide, to destroy communal bonds, and to basically turn people against each other, make people enemy of each other. This is really one of the big challenges that we face.
I would like to say that evangelization by the Catholic Church in the first time of colonialism was in this part of the world very, very strategic and important. His most importance was to introduce a gender system, a binary gender system, and to build this colonized subject. And it worked because they really reached that, for example, many indigenous communities or people or whatever you want to call adopt these values and defend them as they were own values and not something which was imposed. In this moment, what Silvia is telling is very important, because in this moment, the spirit of capitalism has nothing to do with El Tío, has nothing to do with the so-called social ritual. It is the evangelization of, like, Mormones, Cristianos. They are so many. They have a lot of money in the back. Wherever you go, any little community, any little part of the city, they have a piece to, again, what they tell. Again, they are telling for a subordination of women. That is one of the most important points. Against abortion, against homosexuality. Mm-hmm. Is a very strong homophobic and transphobic, his speech, and also against any form of ritual, which is very huge in the Andean society. The ritual and the system of not one God, but polytheistic system of thinking, they speak against that thinking, which is still alive. And they take very strong the women. For example, I have a strong connection with the women in my society, because I'm not talking in a university or I am in the street. I have a strong connection. And many women love my work, but say, please, please, believe in my God. They ask me every day, I need something from you, Maria. And I say, please, tell me, what do you need from me? I will give you in this moment. Believe in my God. Believe in my God, please. And I say, no. That's something I will not do. Never. And that is a very strong press on women. If you want to have a family, if you want to have love, if you want to be protected, because there is a lot of violence in the society, you have to stay with us.
Yeah.
That's that is the spirit of capitalism.
Yeah, it's very, very important. I think it's very, very crucial, because, for example, I was in Brazil recently, and it's amazing. You turn on the TV and you see these thousands and thousands of people, with Jesus. And then you ask why these young people, particularly local people, proletarian people, people who have nothing. Why? And women. And then they would say, well, because in the favela, there's nobody, there's only violence. And if something happens, then the evangelical sects will be there. But they're there, so they will give you a little help. They will give you a little help, but they will give you help in a way that separates you from other people, that turns you against other people. One of the big things that they are doing is decommunalize people. Is decommunalize, is to say, think of yourself, to bring down anything that is collective, anything that ties you to other people. Think of yourself first. Don't think of what you owe to the village. Don't think of what you owe to your family or to your companions. Think of yourself. This is really very, very, and they said, well, that's partially the problem because the left has abandoned the favelas, because there hasn't been a presence, an alternative presence that has really been able to, on a massive level, in the way. And these people have huge amount of money. Maria is absolutely, they really come with lots and lots amount of money, and they are ubiquitous. And when I was in Africa, they were whites. They were whites, and usually from the south of the United States. And they would go to the market and pretend to perform kind of miracles. And they would say, if you have a sore throat, put your hand here and say, Jesus, I have a sore throat. I mean, so, to that level. But now they've been able to actually have people from the local population. And that's even more difficult to combat. But this is today, you cannot fight capitalism without fighting in evangelism. No. Yeah.
Here I wanted to add something. I think, yeah, Silvia is right. There's a lot of individualism that is like a lot of evangelical churches that propose individualism, but there's also rural communities that are dismantled because of migration, and they find together again in the city through those churches. So I made one film called Compañía, which is about migrants from Muñecas, the province in La Paz, and one of the protagonists turns evangelical, and a lot of people that were part of that church were people that somehow, well, when they migrated to the city, the structure of the community, of the rural community, was not there anymore, and these churches offer a space of coming together again, which the Catholic Church does not offer, or not so strong. They have a lot of gatherings during the week, and it's a very strong structure. So maybe that's also something to have in mind. It's not only like becoming an individual, but also finding again a group for people that feel that they have lost that. Yeah.
Yeah, you find the group, yeah, but with a group that, however, connects you to a community, by community that generally has also within itself a principle of exclusion. It's like those of us are okay, but then these other people here are not. So this is one thing again. You find some protection, join in an evangelical sect, you find some community, but you also find a community that discriminates as to who is deserving and who is not. At least that's some of the stories that I've collected. They will say, oh no, those people, you don't deal with them. Or we don't, yes. You have to,
enemy.
yeah. You have to accept a certain yeah. I have to connect actually my electricity here because soon I'll be cut off. Sorry. Okay.
To continue with what Silvia was saying, they need an enemy, and therefore this transphobia, this homophobia, this against abortion are the banderas, the flags of our enemies.
Right, exactly. That's it. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. That was really useful. Thank you. So we have a few minutes left, so I'm gonna share some of the questions from the Q&A with you. So the first questions comes from Alexander Albero. So he writes, I have a question for Maria, though I'd be happy to hear the views of the other speakers on it too. I completely agree with you about the link between colonialism and patriarchy. The two seem to be connected. However, I wonder what you think the relationship of racism is to colonialism and patriarchy.
Well, it is very important because colonialism is a structure which builds the racist structure, the racist classification. And this racist classification of value, of beauty, of desire touches in a very, very direct form women bodies and reproduction. Therefore, I call myself bastard, because the erotic energy of the society circulates through a racist patriarchal hierarchy, which was introduced by colonialism. So, for example, as a phenomenon, maybe we can talk about many phenomena in that field, but one phenomenon. For a so-called indigenous man, the most desirable erotic relation is a white blonde woman. And in Bolivia, for example, los dirigentes, the top of the speakers, the top of the groups of indigenous, they are proud to get to the erotic relationship to a white blonde woman. So racism must, for me, for my point of view, racism has to be understanding to this hierarchical circulation of erotic desire, because I think that is a very original, interesting, and new door. Not to say, here are the innocent, deeply oppressed indigenous people, and here are the very malditos, blancos, gringos de mierda. This idea of dichotomías are very negative to understand the ways in which racism is built.
Thank you. I think we'll have time for one more question, and this one comes from Isaac Gukukpas. So they write, the Society of Potosí, an institution called the Society of Historians, made women's work visible. During the pandemic, they held a workshop called After 460 Years for the Hill, but there were more than 100 women taking care of the mine mouths, the guards. How can we modify that grandiose and myopic view of mining? Miguel, maybe you want to start us off. I was thinking in one point in the video, they talk about, in your video in the exhibition, they talk about how women can't work in the mine, but there is a child that mentions that her mother was a guard. So this idea of sort of women also standing in the entrance, the mouth of the mine.
Yes, I was reading through the question again because I didn't understand it very well, but I think he's talking about the woman's work was made invisible. The guards working in the guarding the mines, that work is being invisible, right?
I think so. That's one part of the question, I think.
Yeah, well, of course, that's the most invisible work that is being done in mining. So the most visible is, of course, the like in Bolivian images, the perforista, which is one of the miners, the most prominent one, because he's the one that opens up the hill. It's also it has a lot of sexual symbolism to it, and then the other workers inside the mine are kind of below on the hierarchy, and the woman's work was mostly in form of palliri, which is selecting the mineral outside, and then the guardas that are most of the time, at least in Potosí, they are widows of miners that died in the mine, and then the work that she gets offered is to guard the entrance of the mine, and with it to guard the instruments and sometimes the mineral that is extracted. And it's of course a job that is very bad paid, and sometimes paid in part of the mineral itself, and she has to sell it. And the girl that is talking about her mother in the film is she says she knows the mine because her mother is a guard. Because normally the young girls or women, well, there's this myth that they should not enter the mine. It's just a masculine territory, but she knows it because her mother is a guard. And yeah, that's maybe in relation to what I know or what appeared in my film.
In South Africa, women do work in the mines now. Yeah.
I just would like to say that the most invisible work in the mine system, in my opinion, is the work of whores, putas, trabajadoras sexuales, or prostitutes, because it is impossible to go ahead with the mine work without this emotional and sexual contention which they give, and they are out of any analysis of mine work in the field of art, in the field of social sciences, or in the field of history.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that in, Maria, because I know there's a little bit of research that's just starting to be done on the economy of sex work in Canada, because that's a huge issue of sexual exploitation and sex work within mining towns. But that's really an important part of the economy. So thank you. We're over time. So I just want to say, Yupay Chani, thank you all so much. I'm a big fan of all your work, and it's been a real honor to have a short chat with all of you today. We are the last program for the Potosí Principle Archive here at ISLAA. And I kind of wanted to close just by, if I could bring up Maria, how you closed your interview with Alice and Andreas in the booklet. You urged them to do something between the archive and the non-archive. And I'm really curious to see how the Potosí Principle and now the Potosí Principle Archive has evolved. And I think, you know, prior to when we were just talking before we went live, you talked about the expansive nature of this project and how it's been sort of picking up people as it goes. And maybe I'd like to end our conversation on that, on staying with these ideas and doing something between the archive and the non-archive. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Gracias. Silvia, te queremos.
Ciao, Maria. Ciao, nos vemos. Sí. Bye to everybody. Bye. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you, everyone.
Chao, chao, Miguel. Nos vemos.
Ciao, Maria.
And
That
closely,
was
I
it.
just wanted to thank you all for this really illuminating, wide-ranging series of presentations and conversation. Thank you, Puyan, for your introduction, and also extending our gratitude to Alice Kreischer and Andreas Siegman for their collaboration on the exhibition, and for producing such a fruitful, generative series of texts that we have had the pleasure of hearing more about through this conversation. And thank you to our audience for joining us for this event. The exhibition, Revisiting the Potosí Principle Archive, Histories of Art and Extraction, is on view through next Saturday, February 10th, as I mentioned in the introduction at the top of our public program. And it's on view at ISLAA, located at 142 Franklin Street. Our hours are Tuesday to Saturday, 12 to 6 p.m. And you'll find more information on our website at islaa.org. And thank you again. We hope to see you soon.